Hey, this is Ben Solomon, and welcome to this episode of the Techno Leadership Show. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the sneaky and controversial issue of technology debt. Now, technology debt is something that I've seen in probably 50 to 60% of the organizations that I've gone into, which is unfortunate, but it is the reality in which the marketplace is working. Yet there is a significant amount of pressure on the technology teams to try and embed the latest possible technology without covering for the technology debt that the organization is carrying. And what do I mean by that? It's people in the top or some fringe parts of the organization going, oh, let's go and get this cool platform that's out there and embed it into this thing so that our jobs would get better, without understanding that the technology infrastructure as such is probably outdated, hasn't been replaced, hasn't been worked on a life cycle where every 3 or 5 years things get replaced so that they're modern, current, and easily manageable, where you can integrate a new solution easily. If you're working on very old legacy systems in the back end, and then you try to add something that's shiny and new at the top, it's not always going to work as well. And it's something that we as tech managers and tech leaders, directors, CIO, CTO, whatever our roles are in that level, we need to make executive management aware of the fact that yes, we would love to be able to embed the latest, greatest thing out there, but we need to first address this issue of our infrastructure, which is lagging behind, before we can do that. And the reason for that, again, in different cases would be different, depending on what kind of legacy systems you have in place. But bring that up, and you have to have frank discussions with your executive management teams and leadership teams, not from the fact of saying, oh, we have to do this because, we are 10 years behind or something like that. But from the point of view of saying, hey, the business is getting affected by not having this aspect of our business modernized, which means we might need 3 more staff members so that we can do the migration. The migration is going to be an 18-month process because we have so much legacy work there, or even longer, depending on how much legacy stuff you have. Some organizations that I've gone into, unfortunately, would have needed 5 years of work probably to get all the migration across and ensure that there are better systems in place to replace some of the legacy systems that are embedded in there, but having some form of a roadmap and tying it to business outcomes. Because the thing is, the problem that happens is the executive team is always looking at business issue. They're not looking into any of the silos of technology or whatever other operational aspect. They're like, well, we've already got all these assets here. Why don't we just use what we've got to get the most out of it, like get as much juice out of it? It's not the fact of us not wanting to be in that place of making the most out of what we've got. We also have to think about the security risks that come up with it, the risk of it failing that comes up with it, the risk of data structures being so old that you can't then easily migrate across to any of the modern systems. That gap keeps widening and widening unless we can bring it to as close as possible to the modern systems. The gap's going to get wider and wider, and the wider it gets, the bigger the risk it is for the business from a standpoint of losing its advantage in the marketplace and even potentially going out of business if it implodes. And the thing is, we have to put this in almost catastrophic terms for executive management to see the level of impact that something going wrong in this technology stack that we may have is going to have on the whole business. And for example, one of the legacy software doesn't work with newer systems. It breaks compatibility, breaks everything. You're not able to work with it. And let's say there's 5 staff in the organization. May not be big, but 5 staff in the organization that completely depend on that system for their day-to-day work. And the work that they do is worth, let's say, $1,000 an hour to clients on the outside. So the impact that $5,000 per hour being lost because of an impact to that system is significant. Maybe to an organization that makes $1 million a day or something like that, probably not. But in that organization, you'd probably have moved from, you would think that you'd have moved from something like that by now, because you're making 300 plus million a year, wouldn't you? But the thing is that we've got to think about this tech debt. And it's something that doesn't always get talked about. And sometimes the way we talk about it as tech professionals and managers and executive leaders is not right. We talk about it from a more technical, this needs to be replaced sort of perspective, rather than from this is how it's going to affect the business and this is how it's currently affecting the business. Although we have workarounds and everything, but this is how much it's affecting the business currently. And we see the potential for the effects to only get worse as time goes on. And so getting that funding for those projects and migrating it across then becomes easier. But it's something that I've tried hard with various organizations that I've worked at to, one, pay off the technology debt as much as possible, even with restrictive budgets and everything. And it can be done creatively. And at the end of the day, making sure that we are as close to current technology as possible. I understand the issues around being on the bleeding edge, or even the leading edge, because you need the kind of resources to be able to be on the leading edge, support your staff, support your team, all of that. But being just a little bit behind the leading edge, i.e. mainstream, being about 6 months or so behind what is out there in the world, is beneficial so that you keep up with that technology aspect and keep up with the infrastructure maintenance aspect, keep up with everything else that is required, rather than staying in old platforms and systems, putting the business and staff and the data and everything under risk. It's something to think about, and something that we need to push hard for, because at the end of the day, we would be held responsible when there is a catastrophic failure. When things implode, it's not anyone else who's going to take responsibility for it. It falls on the head of the CIO or director of technology or IT ops manager or technology manager or engineering manager. If you've got a homebrew software that you're using, it falls on your heads. So don't let that happen. At least have very solid proposals out there with the executive leadership team saying these are the risks that are there in the business, and we need to have some form of solution to pay that debt and get to a point where we are as close to current technology as possible. And this is the roadmap to get us there, and leave it there. And if something happens after the fact of you pounding it hard and saying, look, this is how the situation is, and these are the steps that we need to take to get there, it still doesn't happen, at least you have some form of security to say, look, 6 months ago I told you that this was critical, and you told me there was no money to fund it. And today we've had this catastrophic failure that we've lost this much part of the business, and we could be out of that part of the business for the next week, losing tens of thousands of dollars because we didn't invest into it. You don't have to point fingers saying because you didn't let me do it, rather saying because unfortunately 6 months ago we could have prevented this from happening. We're in a situation where now we need to fix that old system and then look at also implementing this change so that this doesn't happen in the future. Just make sure you cover your backside. That's the thing. In every organization that I've worked at, in my early career, I learned the hard way, not covering myself. And most of the discussions happened verbally, which meant there was no real paper trail saying, this was my suggestion and now things have gone bad. And after the first two such situations where, it was blamed on the technology person, I went, you know what? Every time I've had some discussion around that, I'd email the person, and even if I give a paper proposal to the executive leaders, and this was when I was a tech professional, even if I gave a paper proposal to the executive leaders, I'll send an email with summarized points saying these are the risks, these are the things that need to be done, here's the proposal for the project and the migration and the things, and here are the risk factors that need to be mitigated. Based on our discussion, you've said that you are happy for us to continue to be in that risk position, and that you're happy for this risk to exist in the organization. I know it might seem like it's a bit harsh, but if you have that in writing and someone comes back later, 6 months or 12 months down the track saying, you did not warn us about this, you can say, hey, I sent you this email. All of you received this email. I also gave you paper copies of this proposal with the risk case and analysis, but nothing was done about it. At least you can protect yourself in that sense. And in the long term, in an organization like that, if they continue to not respect your input into these things, you know that they don't really respect you and the work that you're doing. So it's time to find a position where you're respected, where your input's respected, and given the credit that you deserve. So hopefully that helps you out. I know it is a bit of a controversial thing, and it's a sneaky thing that has caught up with a lot of organizations because IT and technology has been considered an operational expense for the last 20 something years, or if not more. And because of that, they've had the least possible investment to get the most possible outcome. But today, IT has become part of the infrastructure of almost every business. And if it's not close enough to today's technology in there, it's a liability that's waiting to implode. So I wish you all the best in your journey as a technology professional, manager, and leader. If you liked this episode, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do hit the subscribe button so that you're notified of future episodes as they are released. I look forward to talking to you in a future episode.